In the cool corridors of power, the Kremlin has flatly rejected a Washington ceasefire offer, arguing that a pause would simply give Ukraine's forces extra room to breathe. Vladimir Putin, standing firm against outside pressure, makes it clear that any break in fighting is not on his agenda. His inner circle insists that a ceasefire only plays into Ukraine's hands. In a recent TV chat, Putin's trusted aide, Yuri Ushakov, expressed strong doubts about the U.S. proposal, warning that a temporary pause would merely let Ukrainian troops gather strength just as Moscow nears a full retake of its lost land in the Kursk area. On camera, Ushakov explained that the plan is nothing more than a brief timeout for Ukraine's military, lacking any real promise of lasting peace. Having once served as Moscow's ambassador in Washington, Ushakov dismissed the idea further, remarking that no one needs empty gestures pretending to bring calm when the situation remains so heated. As these comments echoed on screens, Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, arrived in Moscow early that morning, tasked with persuading Russia to agree to a 30-day break, a proposal that Kyiv had just supported in urgent talks with U.S. officials. At the same time, Kremlin voices warned that sending peacekeepers into Ukraine would be like stepping into open conflict with Moscow, a move they vowed to counter with every tool at their disposal. On another front, Ukraine has called on its European friends to station military units on its soil once the long 3-year fight ends, hoping to ward off any future Russian attacks. While both France and the UK have floated the idea of dispatching peacekeeping forces, Moscow has shot down the suggestion, whether for a short ceasefire or a lasting security plan for Ukraine. Maria Zakharova, speaking for the Foreign Ministry, made it crystal clear having any foreign military presence in Ukraine is completely off the table, as it would drag those nations into a direct fight with Russia. Amidst these firm statements, U.S. negotiators journeyed to Moscow carrying their plan for a 30-day truce, a plan that had already received Kyiv's nod earlier in the week. America is now playing the role of mediator between Ukraine and Russia, with President Trump announcing that his envoys are on their way to Moscow to lay out a potential ceasefire deal. Yet, Moscow has shown little interest in this proposed 30-day pause, with heavy aerial strikes continuing in the days following the plan's announcement. Last night, Putin made a rare trip to Kursk, the first since parts of it were seized by Ukrainian forces in August, as the Kremlin declared that the drive to push Kyiv's troops out was nearly finished. Dressed in his seldom-seen military gear, Putin's appearance sent a powerful message: the fight will go on, a stance so strong that even Poland, uneasy about Moscow's next move, has asked the U.S. to place nuclear weapons on its soil. Meanwhile, as Washington pushes harder for a break in fighting, leaked papers from a prominent Kremlin-linked think tank, reported by a major U.S. newspaper, hint that Russia has been working behind the scenes to block any peace deal since February. It turns out that some of the ideas in these documents, drawn up by a Moscow-based think tank just before key U.S.-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia, have already shaped how the Kremlin is thinking. The report, meant for the FSB's fifth service that handles operations in Ukraine, lays out ways for Russia to boost its position by stirring up tension between the U.S., China, and the EU. Surprisingly, the U.S. has even sided with Russia on 2 separate UN votes, a move that marks a sharp departure from its usual policy and has left its allies scratching their heads. One instance came during a General Assembly session, when America opposed a European proposal condemning Moscow's actions and backing Ukraine's borders. In another vote at the Security Council, the U.S. helped push through a resolution calling for an end to Russia's invasion, remarkably, without directly blaming Russia. The think tank's report goes so far as to argue that, given the situation, Russia should aim to completely dismantle the current government in Ukraine. Ahead of talks with U.S. delegates today, Putin skillfully sidestepped any discussion of a ceasefire, instead ordering his troops to push back and reclaim lost territory in Kursk. Last night, the Russian army claimed it had captured hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers in the area, a region that had seen a surprising counterattack from Ukraine last summer. Standing before his gathered forces in Kursk, Putin declared that these captured fighters would be treated not as ordinary prisoners but as terrorists, facing the possibility of decades behind bars. Disturbing footage later showed the captured soldiers forced to shout praises for Russia, a move that broke the usual rules of war and hinted at a plan to create a demilitarized border zone along Ukraine. Across the Channel in London, Putin's ambassador Andrei Kelin stressed that any move toward a ceasefire would be approached with extreme caution, a concept previously dismissed by Moscow. He hinted that any such truce would come with heavy conditions, mirroring earlier demands made of Ukraine, the US, and NATO, demands many already see as too harsh and unfair. Then, in a dramatic twist, Russia's foreign minister lashed out at British plans to lead a stabilization force in post-conflict Ukraine, claiming it would end up protecting what he called the Nazi regime in Kiev. Barely hours after a major drone attack hit the capital, Sergei Lavrov from Moscow questioned sharply, almost sarcastically, what exactly peacekeepers would protect, implying they'd merely be guarding the remains of a defiant Kiev. Reports from a leading U.S. paper revealed that the same think tank document advised Moscow to reject any European plans for peacekeepers in Ukraine, arguing that such forces would simply fall under strong Western control. At the same time, the report slammed the U.S. for its plans to keep arming Ukraine and for backing its massive military force, actions that the document deemed completely unacceptable. It even suggested that Russia should push for further dividing Ukraine, proposing a buffer zone in the northeast that borders Russia and a no-weapons area near Crimea, a territory Putin annexed back in 2014. The report dismissed Trump's early idea of sealing a Ukraine peace deal within 100 days as impossible, predicting instead that any real peace wouldn't come before 2026. Moreover, the think tank proposed that Russia could improve its negotiating stance by allowing American companies to tap into its rare earth minerals, even in parts of Ukraine now under Russian control. This document was put together just a week before Russia and the U.S. met in Saudi Arabia for crucial talks, a meeting that Ukraine wasn't invited to join. During those February discussions at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, Trump even mocked Ukrainian President Zelensky, teasing him about feeling left out and arguing that Ukraine should have ended the conflict years ago. Yet, Kremlin insiders claim it's actually Putin who is stalling the peace process, using every delay as a chance to grab more territory from Ukraine. On the battlefield, Russia currently holds the upper hand, with its troops outnumbering the Western-supported forces and steadily pushing deeper into eastern Ukraine. Putin views the 30-day pause as completely unacceptable, convinced that it will only slow down his own plans with demands that are too steep. Those close to him are confident that, since he holds most of the cards, he can shape the outcome to his advantage. A senior Kremlin source told Reuters that it's tough for Putin to agree to the ceasefire as it stands, noting that his forces are advancing steadily. Later that night, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov warned against getting ahead of ourselves when discussing Russia's response to the ceasefire offer, saying they were still waiting for detailed information from the U.S. before making any decisions. Among Putin's likely demands is a stop to further military support for Kiev, a point reported by Bloomberg. When asked what the U.S. could do to nudge Russia toward peace, he hinted at potential financial moves that could really hurt Russia, though he stressed he'd rather not use them because he ultimately wants peace. Trump quickly added that while harsh financial actions could indeed devastate Russia, he wasn't eager to take that route either. Europe, too, is putting pressure on Moscow, urging the Kremlin to come to terms and accept the proposed deal. Speaking from Paris just last night, the UK's defense secretary made it clear to Putin that the ball was now in his court, signaling that it was time to act. John Healey MP also urged the Kremlin chief to agree to a ceasefire, start negotiations, and finally end the war, making it unmistakably clear that the pressure on Putin is mounting. He pointed out that this year, the UK is set to spend a record £4.5 billion, while Britain and France continue to push for peace and set up security plans for Ukraine, showing their unwavering commitment. He wrapped up his message by noting that nations from all over Europe and beyond are working closely together. Just yesterday, military leaders from 34 countries met in Paris for over an hour, with more meetings on the horizon to keep the push for peace alive.